"Please don't fire me, sir," the maid said to her billionaire CEO, and changed her entire 2026. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Hartley mansion, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Lena moved quietly through the halls, her cleaning cart wheels barely making a sound on the expensive surfaces. She'd perfected this routine over the years, knowing exactly which rooms to tackle first, which surfaces needed extra attention, and most importantly, how to remain nearly invisible while doing it all. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 7 times. Lena checked her reflection in one of the mirrors lining the hallway, making sure her uniform was pristine and her dark hair was neatly secured in its bun. Mr. Hartley valued precision and order above all else. She began with the living room, methodically dusting the antique furniture. Her movements were practiced and efficient as she worked her way through the room, paying special attention to the family photographs arranged on the mantelpiece, these rare glimpses into Mr. Hartley's past always caught her attention, especially the ones from before, when his smile reached his eyes. The sound of papers shuffling drew her attention as she approached his office. Through the partially open door, she could see Mr. Hartley at his massive mahogany desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wore his favorite white shirt today, the one that fit him perfectly, and made him look even more distinguished than usual. Stacks of documents surrounded him like paper fortresses. Lena knocked softly on the doorframe. "Good morning, Mr. Hartley. Would you like your coffee now?" He barely glanced up, giving a short nod. "Yes, thank you, Lena." She headed to the kitchen, her heart beating a little faster, as it always did when she interacted with him. The coffee routine was sacred: Colombian dark roast, freshly ground, with exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar. No cream. The temperature had to be perfect, hot enough to emit steam, but not scalding. While the coffee brewed, Lena organized his breakfast tray with precision. A single croissant, butter at room temperature, and the morning newspaper folded exactly how he preferred it. She'd learned these details through careful observation, never having been directly told. Walking back to his office, Lena balanced the tray carefully. The morning light streaming through the windows created dazzling patterns on the walls, momentarily catching her attention. That's when it happened. Her foot caught on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. Time seemed to slow down as the coffee cup tilted, its dark contents arcing through the air in slow motion. Lena watched in horror as the liquid splashed across Mr. Hartley's pristine white shirt, creating an expanding brown stain across his chest. Mr. Hartley jumped up from his chair, papers scattering across his desk. "For God's sake!" he exclaimed, grabbing tissues from his desk to dab at the spreading stain. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hartley." Lena scrambled to help, her hands trembling as she reached for more tissues. "Please, let me." "Don't." His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. He held up a hand to stop her approach, his jaw clenched tight. "This shirt was custom made in Milan. Do you have any idea how much it costs?" Lena felt her face grow hot with shame. "I'll pay for it to be cleaned, sir. I promise." "This isn't just about the shirt, Lena." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disturbing it for the first time she could remember. "It's about attention to detail, standards, excellence. This is the 3rd mistake this week." Lena's stomach dropped as she recalled the slightly wrinkled newspaper on Tuesday and the water spot she'd missed on a window yesterday. Small things that she'd hoped he hadn't noticed. "I've been patient," he continued, his voice growing colder with each word. "But this is the last straw. I can't afford mistakes right now, not with everything at stake." He looked at her directly, his gray eyes hard. "You're fired." Lena's world stopped spinning. The words, "you're fired," echoed in her head like a death sentence. Her hands trembled as she clutched the now empty coffee cup, her knuckles turning white from the grip. "Mr. Hartley, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't lose this job." Images of her family flashed through her mind, her mother's medical bills, her younger sister's college tuition. This job wasn't just about her, it was their lifeline. He turned away from her, focusing on the coffee stain spreading across his expensive shirt. "My decision is final. You can collect your things and—" "Please!" The desperation in her voice made him pause. "I'll do anything. Give me one more chance." Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help her now. "I've worked here for 3 years. You know how dedicated I am." Mr. Hartley's jaw clenched as he looked at her. The morning sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the silver at his temples, the stress lines around his eyes that seemed deeper lately. "Dedication isn't enough, Lena. I need perfection right now. The company—" He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before revealing too much. "Then let me prove myself," Lena pressed, taking a careful step forward. "Give me the hardest task you have. Test me however you want. I'll show you that I can meet your standards." Her heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. Something flickered in his gray eyes. Consideration, perhaps? Or was it desperation of his own? He moved behind his desk, his movements precise and controlled as always, but Lena noticed a slight tension in his shoulders that wasn't usually there. "You don't know what you're offering," he said finally, his voice low. "The task I need help with, it's far beyond your usual duties." Hope sparked in Lena's chest. "I'm smarter than you think, Mr. Hartley. I have a business degree. I've watched you work for years. I understand more than you realize." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. His eyebrows rose slightly, the most expression she'd seen from him in months. "A business degree?" He studied her with new interest. "Why are you working as a maid?" Lena lifted her chin. "Because my family needed immediate income, and this was the best option at the time. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten what I learned." "Mister?" Hartley sat down heavily in his leather chair, drumming his fingers on the desk. The sound filled the tense silence between them. Finally, he spoke. "There's a project. It's confidential, absolutely vital to the company's future. I've been handling it alone because I can't trust anyone else with it." Lena held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had made him consider her request. "If, and I mean if, I decide to give you another chance," he continued, his voice stern, "you would need to sign additional confidentiality agreements. Your hours would change. The work would be demanding, precise, and far more complex than anything you've done here before." "I understand," Lena said quickly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said finally. "One chance, Lena? One. If you make a single mistake, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, even hint at it, you won't just lose your job. You'll never work in this city again. Do you understand?" Lena straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, Mr. Hartley. I understand completely. Report to my office tomorrow morning at 6. We'll begin then." He turned back to his papers, a clear dismissal. "And Lena?" She paused at the door. "Yes, sir?" "Bring a fresh shirt with you. This one needs to go to the cleaners." The next morning, Lena arrived at exactly 5:45 a.m., her arms full with a fresh shirt and a notebook she'd dug out from her old college days. The mansion was quiet, shadows still clinging to the corners as dawn barely peeked through the windows. She smoothed her simple black dress, the most professional outfit she owned, and tried to calm her racing heart. This wasn't dusting or organizing anymore. This was her one chance to prove herself. Mr. Hartley's office door was already open. light spilling into the hallway. She found him at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and multiple laptop screens. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect appearance slightly rumpled. "The shirt," he said without looking up, holding out his hand. Lena placed the freshly pressed shirt on his desk. "I took the liberty of having your other one professionally cleaned last night. It should be ready this afternoon." That made him glance up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Efficient," he murmured, before turning one of the laptops toward her. "Sign these documents first. Non-disclosure agreements. Read them carefully." The legal documents were dense, but Lena's business education helped her understand the key points. Her signature would bind her to complete secrecy about whatever she was about to learn. The penalties for breaking this trust were severe. "Done," she said, pushing the laptop back toward him. Mr. Hartley stood, buttoning his jacket. "Follow me." He led her through a door she'd never been allowed to enter before, into his private study. The room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a vast mahogany table in the center. Papers and files covered every surface. "The company is in trouble," he said bluntly, closing the door behind them. "My father built this empire from nothing, but now—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "We're losing market share. Innovation has stalled. The board is considering a merger that would essentially destroy everything my father created." Lena absorbed this information, noting the pain in his voice when he mentioned his father. "And you're working on a way to prevent that?" "Yes." He moved to the table, spreading out several documents. "These are proposals from different departments, new products, marketing strategies, restructuring plans. But none of them are enough on their own. We need something revolutionary." She studied the papers, her mind already analyzing the information. "Why are you telling me this? What can I do to help?" "Mister," Hartley ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone usually so controlled. "You said you have a business degree. I need fresh eyes on this. Someone who can see patterns I might be missing. Someone who—" He hesitated. "Someone who has nothing to gain by betraying my trust." The weight of his words hit her. He wasn't just giving her a second chance. He was trusting her with everything he had. "Your father," she said carefully, watching his reaction. "He passed away recently, didn't he?" 6 months ago. His voice was tight. "The board gave me 1 year to turn things around. Half that time is gone." Suddenly, his recent behavior made sense. The increased tension, the harsh reactions, the longer hours. He wasn't just fighting for a company. He was fighting for his father's legacy. "I understand now," Lena said softly. "Why everything has to be perfect. Why you can't afford mistakes, even small ones like spilled coffee." He turned to look at her. Really look at her, perhaps for the first time. "Yes," he said simply. "Then let me help," she offered, moving towards the table. "Show me everything. I may not have your experience, but sometimes an outsider's perspective is exactly what's needed." Mr. Hartley nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "We'll start with these market analyses. I need you to look for any patterns the research team might have missed." As they began to work, Lena stole glances at him, seeing beyond the stern exterior to the man beneath, someone carrying an enormous burden, desperate to honor his father's memory, and perhaps more alone than she'd realized. The next morning arrived with a strange new routine. Instead of dusting the mansion's endless surfaces, Lena found herself in Mr. Hartley's private study by 7 a.m., armed with fresh coffee and a notebook. "These quarterly reports need reviewing," Mr. Hartley said, not looking up from his computer. "Flag anything unusual." Lena settled into what had become her corner of the massive mahogany table. The silence felt different now, less like a wall and more like a shared space of concentration. Still, she couldn't shake her awareness of him, the way his presence filled the room. Hours passed in quiet focus. Occasionally their hands would brush when passing documents, causing Lena's heart to skip. Once, they both reached for the coffee pot at the same time, and Mr. Hartley actually stepped back, gesturing for her to go first, a small courtesy that seemed enormous given their usual dynamic. By the third day, Lena had developed a system. She organized the reports by department, creating color-coded tabs for different issues she'd noticed. The work absorbed her so completely that she jumped when Mr. Hartley spoke. "You missed lunch again." Lena blinked, realizing the sun had shifted. "Oh, I didn't notice the time." "That's becoming a habit." His tone was neutral, but something in it made her look up. He seemed more tired than usual, the shadows under his eyes darker. "I could make us both something," she offered, falling back on her caretaking instincts. "It wouldn't take long." He shook his head, returning to his work. But 20 minutes later, a delivery arrived, enough food for both of them. They ate in awkward silence, stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. The fourth day brought rain and a tension headache that had Mr. Hartley pacing the study like a caged animal. Lena watched him from the corner of her eye, noting how he kept rubbing his temples. "Sir," she ventured carefully, "maybe we should take a break?" "There are no breaks," he snapped, then immediately closed his eyes. "I apologize. That was unnecessary." "It's all right." Lena stood slowly. "But you won't help the company by working yourself sick." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. The careful mask he usually wore had slipped, revealing exhaustion and fear beneath. "Do you know what happens if we fail?" His voice was low, raw. 3,000 people lose their jobs. My father's life's work disappears. Everything he built, everything he trusted me to protect, gone. Lena stepped closer, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. "Mr. Hartley, the board thinks I'm not ready." He laughed bitterly. "Maybe they're right. I've been CEO for 6 months, and already the company is sliding toward disaster." "That's not true," Lena said firmly. "The market changes weren't your fault, and you're fighting to fix things. That's what matters." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of deep stress. Fighting and winning are different things. "Then let me help more," she offered. "I can take on additional tasks, stay later if needed." "You already work too much." He cut her off, but his tone was gentler now. "I see you, you know. Always here early, leaving late. Why do you care so much?" The question caught her off guard. How could she explain that watching him carry this burden alone felt impossible? That somewhere between the coffee spill and now, his problems had become her problems? "Because," she said carefully, "I believe in what we're doing. And because no one should have to face something like this alone." Mr. Hartley stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. The silence between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he sighed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "My father would have liked you," he said quietly. "He always said the measure of a person was how they handled pressure. You've shown more grace under pressure than most executives I know." The compliment warmed her chest, but before she could respond, he turned back to his desk, clearly uncomfortable with having revealed so much. Yet something had changed. The wall between them had cracked, just slightly, letting in a glimpse of the man behind the CEO's mask. Lena arranged papers on her desk, settling into what had become her regular spot in Mr. Hartley's study. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. She'd grown accustomed to their quiet routine, the soft rustle of papers, the gentle tapping of his keyboard, the occasional sigh when something troubled him. Through the partially open door, voices drifted in from the hallway. Mr. Hartley was speaking with someone, his tone more strained than usual. "The numbers aren't improving fast enough, James," Mr. Hartley said. "We're running out of time." "Alex, you're being too hard on yourself," the other man replied. "Your father faced similar challenges." "My father wouldn't have let it get this bad in the first place." The bitterness in Mr. Hartley's voice made Lena's heart ache. He would have seen it coming. "You can't keep comparing yourself to him. Sarah wouldn't want—" "Don't." Mr. Hartley's voice turned sharp. "Just don't bring her up." Lena pretended to be absorbed in her work when Mr. Hartley returned, but she couldn't help noticing how heavily he sat in his chair, the weight of unseen burdens visible in the slope of his shoulders. They worked in silence for nearly an hour before he spoke. "I apologize if you overheard that conversation," he said quietly, not looking up from his desk. "It was unprofessional." "There's nothing to apologize for," Lena replied softly. She hesitated, then added, "Sometimes talking helps." He gave a hollow laugh. "Does it? In my experience, talking just makes things more real." "Maybe that's not always bad." Lena gathered her courage. "Who was Sarah?" The silence that followed was so long that Lena thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Mr. Hartley's hands had stilled on his keyboard, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. "Sarah was—" he started, then stopped. Swallowed hard. "Sarah was everything." He stood abruptly, walking to the window. Lena remained perfectly still, afraid any movement might break this fragile moment of openness. "We met in college," he continued, his voice distant. "She was brilliant, studying environmental science, always talking about changing the world. She made me believe I could do anything." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We were engaged by graduation, had everything planned out." Lena's heart squeezed as she realized where this story was heading. "The accident happened 3 weeks before our wedding." His words came slower now, each one seeming to cost him something. "Black ice on the road. They said she died instantly." His knuckles whitened where they gripped the window frame. 10 years ago, and sometimes it feels like yesterday." "I'm so sorry," Lena whispered, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "She would have known how to handle all this." He gestured vaguely at the papers surrounding them. "The company crisis, the board's pressure. She always knew exactly what to say." He turned slightly, and Lena caught the raw pain in his profile. "My father, he helped me through it, gave me purpose again. And now I'm failing him too." "You're not failing anyone," Lena said firmly, surprising herself with her conviction. "You're fighting. Every day you're fighting." Mr. Hartley turned to face her fully then, something vulnerable in his expression. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Defend me, even after how I've treated you." Lena met his gaze steadily. "Because I see how much you care. About the company, about your father's legacy, about the people who work for you. Someone who cares that much deserves to be defended." Something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the morning sun painting golden streaks across the study floor between them. Finally, Mr. Hartley cleared his throat. "We should get back to work," he said, but his voice was gentler than before. As he returned to his desk, Lena noticed his shoulders seemed a little lighter, as if sharing the weight of his past had eased it somewhat. The morning light filtered through the study's windows, as Lena organized another stack of financial reports. 3 days had passed since Mr. Hartley's revelation about Sarah, and something had shifted between them. Subtle but undeniable. The silence that filled the room felt different now, charged with unspoken understanding rather than awkward tension. "Could you bring those projections over here?" Mr. Hartley called from his desk, his voice softer than it used to be. Lena gathered the papers and approached him. As she leaned over to place them on his desk, her arm brushed against his shoulder. The brief contact sent a jolt through her, and she quickly stepped back, nearly stumbling. Mr. Hartley's hand shot out to steady her. "Careful," he said, his fingers warm against her elbow. Their eyes met for a moment before both looked away. "Thank you," Lena murmured, retreating to her corner of the study. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent reviewing documents, afternoons in strategy meetings. Lena learned to read Mr. Hartley's moods, the way he ran his hands through his hair when frustrated, how his jaw clenched when looking at particularly troubling numbers. One afternoon, she found him staring out the window, lost in thought. "The board meeting didn't go well?" she ventured. He turned, seeming surprised to find her there. "They're getting impatient, want results faster than we can deliver them." Without thinking, Lena stepped closer. "You'll find a way. You always do." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "Your faith in me is unexpected." "Not faith," she corrected. "Observation." The corner of his mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile, but close. Later that evening, Lena was finishing up some filing when her stomach growled loudly. Mr. Hartley glanced up from his computer. "When was the last time you ate?" She thought about it. "Breakfast, I suppose." He frowned. "It's nearly 8 o'clock. He stood up, decisively closing his laptop. "Come on." "Where are we going?" "The kitchen. I'm not having you faint from hunger on my watch." The kitchen was quiet and dimly lit. Lena felt oddly nervous as Mr. Hartley pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "Occasionally." He started chopping vegetables with practiced ease. "Sarah taught me. She said everyone should know how to make at least one proper meal." Instead of the usual pain, there was almost fondness in his voice when he mentioned Sarah's name. Lena smiled, watching him work. "Can I help?" He nodded toward the onions. "Those need dicing." They worked side by side, the kitchen filling with the aroma of sautéing vegetables and herbs. Their arms brushed occasionally as they moved around each other, each touch sending tiny sparks through Lena's skin. When the simple pasta dish was ready, Mr. Hartley surprised her by setting 2 places at the kitchen island, instead of his usual spot in the dining room. "Join me?" he asked, and it sounded more like a request than an order. They sat together, the kitchen's warm lighting casting a gentle glow. Lena took a bite and couldn't help her appreciative murmur. "This is delicious." "Don't sound so surprised," he said, but there was humor in his voice. As they ate, Lena watched him from the corner of her eye. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and he looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The weight of his responsibilities seemed to have lifted, if only temporarily. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked at her questioningly. "For sharing this with me. The meal, the cooking, the stories about Sarah." Mr. Hartley was quiet for a moment, studying his plate. "It's strange," he finally said. "I haven't talked about her with anyone in years. Somehow, with you—" He trailed off, meeting her eyes. "It feels right." Lena's heart squeezed in her chest. Looking at him now, this powerful man who carried such deep wounds, who struggled daily with the weight of his responsibilities and grief, she felt something shift inside her. Her sympathy for him transformed into something deeper, more profound. She understood him, not just as her employer, but as a person who had loved and lost, who fought battles nobody saw, who needed someone to simply be there. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, the quiet broken only by the soft clink of cutlery and the distant ticking of the kitchen clock. Lena arranged the documents on Mr. Hartley's desk, organizing them by priority, as she'd learned he preferred. Her fingers traced the edge of a particularly concerning financial report. The numbers weren't good. She'd picked up enough over the past weeks to understand that much. Mr. Hartley entered his office, his shirt sleeves already rolled up despite the early hour. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of another sleepless night. "Good morning," she said softly, stepping back from his desk. He nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What do we have today?" "The quarterly projections came in." She hesitated, then added, "They're not what we hoped for." Mr. Hartley sank into his chair, reaching for the report. As he scanned the pages, his jaw tightened. "These figures—" He looked up at her. "What's your impression?" The question caught her off guard. "Sir? You've been reviewing these reports with me for weeks now. You must have formed some opinions." Lena's heart raced. She gathered her courage and moved closer to his desk. "Well, I noticed that while overall revenue is down, there's a bright spot in the European market." She pointed to a specific line item, particularly in sustainable energy projects. He leaned forward, studying the numbers she indicated. "Go on." "It seems like there's growing demand there, but we're not fully positioned to meet it." She held her breath, wondering if she'd overstepped, but Mr. Hartley was nodding slowly. "You're right." He stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "What else have you observed?" Over the next hour, Lena shared her thoughts on various aspects of the business. She pointed out patterns she'd noticed, areas where resources might be better allocated. Mr. Hartley listened intently, occasionally asking questions that made her think deeper. "I never realized you had such a head for business," he said, returning to his desk. "I've always been good with patterns," she admitted. "And watching you work, I've learned a lot." He smiled slightly. "You've been paying attention?" They spent the morning reviewing more reports. When lunch arrived, Mr. Hartley surprised her by asking her to stay and continue their discussion. As they ate, he shared more details about the company's history, his father's vision, and the challenges they faced. "The board wants immediate results," he explained, pushing his plate aside. "But sustainable growth takes time." Lena thought for a moment. "What if we could show them both?" "Both. Quick wins and long-term stability." She reached for a notepad. "The European projects are already showing promise. If we redirect some resources there immediately, we could see short-term gains while building towards something bigger." Mr. Hartley's eyes lit up. "Combine it with the new technology division." "Exactly!" Lena felt her excitement building. "Use the proven success in Europe to justify expanding into emerging markets." He stood up and began pacing, energy radiating from him. "We could structure it in phases, show the board immediate action while laying groundwork for future expansion." They spent the next hour outlining the idea, their words tumbling over each other as the plan took shape. Lena found herself sketching diagrams while Mr. Hartley made rapid notes. Finally, he stepped back and looked at their work spread across his desk. "This—" He shook his head, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "This is brilliant, Lena." She blushed, ducking her head. "No, really." He moved closer, his voice warm. "You have remarkable insight. You see things others miss, including me." His eyes met hers. "I'm genuinely impressed." The praise washed over her like warm sunlight. For the first time since starting this job, Lena felt truly seen. Not as just a maid who had stumbled into an opportunity, but as someone with real value to offer. Mr. Hartley gathered the papers, still smiling. "Let's refine this proposal. I want your input every step of the way." Lena nodded, her heart full. In this moment, watching him organize their shared work with renewed purpose, she felt something shift between them. A new level of respect and understanding that made her previous role as just his maid seem like a lifetime ago. The autumn days grew shorter, but Lena's hours at the mansion lengthened. What had started as simple project assistance had evolved into something more complex. She found herself spending evenings in Mr. Hartley's study, going over reports and sharing ideas, while the sky outside darkened to purple. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Lena caught herself watching him instead of the spreadsheet before her. The way his brow furrowed in concentration, how his hands moved as he explained his thoughts. She noticed everything now. "The numbers don't add up here," he murmured, running a hand through his hair. Lena leaned closer, ignoring the flutter in her chest at their proximity. "Let me see." Their shoulders brushed as she examined the document. The subtle cologne he wore made it hard to focus on the figures. She forced herself to concentrate, though her heart raced. "There's a discrepancy in the third quarter projections," she managed, pointing to the relevant row. "See how it doesn't match with the previous data?" He nodded, and she felt the movement rather than saw it. "Good catch." These moments were becoming dangerous. Every small praise, every accidental touch, every shared look of understanding, they all chipped away at her professional resolve. During their working lunches, she found herself memorizing his habits. How he always saved the cherry tomatoes for last in his salad. The way he absently stirred his coffee while deep in thought. She knew when his shoulders tensed that a headache was coming on, and she'd quietly dim the lights and bring him aspirin before he asked. "You're very observant," he remarked one afternoon, accepting the pills with a grateful smile. "It's my job to anticipate needs," she replied, though they both knew her attentiveness went beyond duty. The following week she found him in his office late at night, staring at an old photograph. His father's image smiled back from the frame, standing proud in front of the company building. "He would have known what to do," Mr. Hartley said softly, not looking up. Lena set down the tea she'd brought him. "You're doing everything you can." "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough." His voice carried a weight she rarely heard. Without thinking, she touched his shoulder. "Your father would be proud of how hard you're fighting for his legacy." He covered her hand with his own, and for a moment they stayed that way, connected by more than just business concerns. Lena's heart thundered in her chest, and she gently withdrew, reminding herself of boundaries she couldn't cross. But Mr. Hartley began seeking her out more often after that night. He'd ask for her opinion on matters beyond the project, value her insight on personal decisions. She became his sounding board, the person he turned to when doubt crept in. "What would I do without you?" he asked one evening, after she'd helped him prepare for a crucial board meeting. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to address. Lena busied herself organizing papers, willing her cheeks not to flush. "You'd manage," she said lightly, though the thought of not being there for him made her chest ache. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think I would." Their eyes met, and Lena saw something shift in his expression, a softening, a recognition. He stepped closer, and for one heart-stopping moment she thought he might. But then his phone rang, shattering the moment. As he turned to answer it, Lena pressed a hand to her racing heart, knowing she was in far too deep. These feelings she harbored were becoming impossible to ignore, yet she had to maintain her professionalism. Her job, her livelihood, depended on it. Still, she couldn't help but notice how he now sought her presence even when work didn't require it. How his smiles, once rare, came more easily when she was around. How he'd started sharing small details about his day, his thoughts, his memories, building a bridge between them that went beyond employer and employee. She was falling for him, and somehow it seemed he was beginning to rely on her too. Not just for business insights or practical support, but for the comfort of having someone who understood him, who saw past his walls to the man beneath. Lena watched her reflection in the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on her flushed cheeks. Her hands trembled slightly as she patted her face dry with a soft towel. These feelings for Mr. Hartley were becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. "Get it together," she whispered to herself. "He's your employer, nothing more." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. The way her heart raced when he entered a room, how she found herself making excuses to be near him, the electricity that sparked through her when their hands accidentally brushed. It was all becoming overwhelming. Walking down the hallway, she straightened a picture frame that had tilted slightly. It was an old photograph of the Hartley mansion, taken when Mr. Hartley's father still ran the company. The house looked exactly the same now as it did then. She took pride in maintaining its pristine condition. Her job meant everything to her. The steady income helped support her family, and she'd worked hard to earn Mr. Hartley's trust. Could she really risk it all because of these inappropriate feelings? She remembered how he'd looked at her yesterday, the softness in his eyes when she'd brought him coffee just the way he liked it. No sugar, splash of cream. For a moment, she'd allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if things were different, if they'd met under different circumstances. "Stop it," she scolded herself, moving to dust the antique vase in the hallway. "You're being ridiculous." The sound of voices from Mr. Hartley's study made her pause. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear him speaking with someone, his tone more emotional than usual. "I can't fail, James," Mr. Hartley was saying. "This isn't just about the company's success. It's about everything my father built." Lena knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but something in his voice held her in place. "My father started this company with nothing but determination and a dream," he continued. "He worked 18-hour days, missed family dinners, sacrificed everything to build it from the ground up. This project, it's not just another business deal, it's his legacy." There was a pause, and Lena heard footsteps pacing across the hardwood floor. "The last thing he said to me before he died was to take care of his life's work, to make sure it survived, to make it grow. If I lose this company now, I'm not just failing as a businessman, I'm failing him." The raw pain in his voice made Lena's chest tighten. She'd known the project was important, but hearing him speak about it this way gave it new meaning. This wasn't just about maintaining his wealth or status. It was about honoring his father's memory, about protecting something precious that had been entrusted to him. "The board doesn't understand," Mr. Hartley continued. "They see numbers on a spreadsheet. They don't see the nights my father spent at his desk, planning and dreaming. They don't remember how he knew every employee's name, how he treated them like family." Lena pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. She thought about all the times she'd seen Mr. Hartley working late into the night, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. She understood now why he pushed himself so hard, why failure wasn't an option. The conversation in the study shifted to technical details, but Lena had heard enough. She quietly moved away from the door, her heart aching with newfound understanding. The attraction she felt for him had just grown stronger, deepened by this glimpse into his vulnerable core. He wasn't just the successful, distant CEO she'd first known. He was a son trying desperately to honor his father's memory, to protect something bigger than himself. And now her feelings were even more complicated. because how could she not fall for a man who carried such depth of feeling, such commitment to his family's legacy? Yet at the same time, how could she let these feelings jeopardize her position when he needed focused, professional support more than ever? Lena's fingers trembled as she organized the stack of financial reports on her desk. The numbers weren't adding up, and she could feel the tension radiating from Mr. Hartley's office, like waves of heat. She'd spent the last 3 hours double-checking everything, knowing how crucial accuracy was for this project. "These projections can't be right," she heard him mutter through the partially open door. The sound of papers shuffling, and a heavy sigh followed. Her stomach twisted. After overhearing his conversation about his father's legacy yesterday, every setback felt personal. She wasn't just watching her employer struggle. She was watching a son fight to preserve his father's dream. Taking a deep breath, Lena gathered the courage to knock on his office door. "Mr. Hartley, I've finished reviewing those quarterly reports you asked for." He looked up, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "Come in, Lena." She approached his desk, conscious of how her heart quickened at their proximity. The morning light streaming through the window caught the silver in his hair, and she forced herself to focus on the papers in her hands instead. "I found some discrepancies in the third quarter projections," she said softly. "The manufacturing costs seem higher than our initial estimates." Mr. Hartley's jaw tightened. He reached for the papers, his fingers brushing against hers. The brief contact sent electricity through her, but his expression remained troubled. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said, scanning the numbers. "The whole project hinges on keeping costs down. If we can't maintain the projected margins—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. Lena wanted to reach out to comfort him somehow. Instead, she clasped her hands together tightly. "Perhaps we could look at alternative suppliers? I noticed that—" "I've already considered every alternative," he cut in sharply. "We need a solution, not more problems." The harshness in his voice made her flinch. She knew it wasn't personal, knew he was under immense pressure, but it still stung. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I just thought—" "That's not your job," he snapped, standing abruptly. "Your job is to assist me, not try to solve problems you don't fully understand." The words hit her like physical blows. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. "Of course, sir. I apologize." He began pacing, his agitation palpable. "These numbers could sink the entire project. Everything I've worked for, everything my father built—" His voice cracked slightly. Lena stood frozen, torn between her duty to help and her growing emotional turmoil. She'd never seen him this upset, this raw. Part of her wanted to tell him how much she believed in him, how she'd seen his dedication and strength. But his earlier words had created a wall between them. Would you like me to leave?" she asked hesitantly. He stopped pacing and turned to look at her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or something deeper. But then his expression hardened again. "Yes," he said coldly. "I need to focus, and you're—" He gestured vaguely. "You're distracting me." The dismissal felt like ice in her veins. Lena nodded mechanically and turned toward the door, willing herself to maintain composure. She could feel his eyes on her back as she left, but he didn't call her back, didn't apologize. In the hallway, she pressed a trembling hand against the wall to steady herself. The pain in her chest was physical, as if he'd reached in and squeezed her heart. How had she let herself become so invested, so vulnerable? She'd known from the start that any feelings for him were inappropriate, impossible. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. She'd thought they'd been making progress, thought he'd started to see her as more than just a maid. Now she wondered if she'd imagined it all, if she'd been fooling herself this whole time. Lena sat in the mansion's kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The evening shadows stretched across the marble countertops, and the usual comfort she found in this space felt hollow tonight. Mr. Hartley's harsh words from earlier still echoed in her mind. "Your job is to assist me, not try to solve problems you don't fully understand." She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar sting of tears threatening to return. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking each moment of her indecision. Her resignation letter lay half-written on her phone. Just a few taps, and she could end this growing heartache. Through the kitchen window, she could see lights still burning in his office. Even after their argument, he was still working, still fighting for his company. The sight made her chest ache in a different way. Lena got up and began to clean, finding solace in the familiar motions. As she wiped down the counters, memories of their shared moments flooded back. The late-night dinner he'd made for her, his rare, genuine smile when she'd helped him break through a difficult problem, the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd spoken about his first love. She paused, cloth in hand, as realization washed over her. These weren't just memories of her employer. They were precious moments she'd collected, stored away in her heart. Each one represented a different facet of the man she'd grown to care for deeply. "Oh," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "I really do love him, don't I?" The truth of it settled over her like a warm blanket. It wasn't just attraction or admiration. It was love, with all its complications and impossibilities. She loved his dedication, his strength, even his flaws. She loved how he carried the weight of his father's legacy, how he fought for his company even when exhausted. Lena moved to the window, watching the distant figure of Mr. Hartley in his office. He was standing now, his silhouette sharp against the warm light. Even from here, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried alone. Her phone buzzed, the half-written resignation letter still waiting for her decision. Lena picked it up, staring at the words that could end her time here. It would be easier to leave, to protect her heart from more pain. The sensible choice would be to find another job, one where her feelings wouldn't complicate everything. But when had love ever been sensible? She deleted the draft. Moving to the stove, Lena began preparing fresh coffee, the way he liked it, strong and black. She might not be able to solve his business problems, but she could offer support in her own way. Whether he appreciated it or not, whether he ever returned her feelings or not, she would stay. "I won't give up on you," she whispered, arranging a small tray with coffee and the cookies she knew he rarely indulged in, but secretly enjoyed. Her hands were steady now, her heart certain. Love wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it was about choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. Sometimes it was about offering quiet support, even when it wasn't acknowledged. As she lifted the tray, Lena felt stronger than she had all day. Yes, his words had hurt, but she understood the pain behind them. He was fighting for something bigger than himself. And now, so was she. She would be there, steady and unwavering, helping in whatever way she could. She straightened her uniform and took a deep breath. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was choosing it with clear eyes and an open heart. Whether Mr. Hartley ever saw her as more than his maid didn't matter right now. What mattered was that he didn't have to face his struggles alone. With renewed determination, Lena headed toward his office, carrying more than just coffee and cookies. She carried hope, understanding, and a love that had grown stronger through adversity. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she pushed open Mr. Hartley's office door, the silver tray balanced carefully in her grip. The room was dim, lit only by his desk lamp, and the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. Hartley looked up from his computer, his expression softening at the sight of her. The harsh lines of stress around his eyes seemed to ease slightly. "Lena," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I've been meaning to speak with you." She set the tray down carefully on his desk, arranging the coffee and cookies just the way he preferred. "Sir, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He stood up, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair. "My behavior earlier was inexcusable. I let the pressure get to me and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." Lena's heart squeezed at the genuine remorse in his voice. She'd never seen him like this before. Vulnerable, almost uncertain. "The truth is," he continued, moving to stand by the window, "I'm overwhelmed. The board is breathing down my neck, and this project, it's everything my father worked for. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in it all." "I understand, sir," Lena said softly, taking a small step toward him. "Everyone has moments when it becomes too much." He turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "You've been nothing but helpful, Lena. Your insights, your dedication. I've come to rely on them more than I'd care to admit." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lena felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. "Perhaps," he said, gesturing to the sitting area of his office, "we could start fresh? I'd like to hear your thoughts on the project, properly this time." They settled into the leather armchairs, the city sprawling out beneath them. As they began discussing the project, Lena noticed a shift in their dynamic. Mr. Hartley listened intently, asking questions, considering her suggestions with genuine interest. Hours passed as they worked, the tension from earlier completely dissolved. When Mr. Hartley reached for his third cookie, a small smile played at his lips. "My mother used to make cookies like these," he admitted. "She'd say even the biggest problems seem smaller with something sweet." "My grandmother said the same thing," Lena found herself sharing. "She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Mr. Hartley's expression shifted to one of surprise, then understanding. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Not many people do." Lena's fingers traced the pattern on her teacup. "She worked 3 jobs to put me through school. That's why this position means so much to me. I'm able to help support her now, make sure she's comfortable in her retirement." "Your dedication to her is admirable," Mr. Hartley said, his voice warm with respect. "She taught me that sacrifice is just another word for love," Lena continued, surprised by her own openness. "When things get difficult, I remember how she never complained, never gave up. It helps me keep going." Mr. Hartley was quiet for a moment, studying her with new eyes. "You're quite remarkable, Lena," he said finally. "I think I'm beginning to understand why my instincts told me to give you that second chance." The weight of his words settled around them like a comfortable blanket. They worked late into the night, their conversation flowing naturally between professional matters and personal stories. Lena shared about her dreams of opening a small bookstore someday, while Mr. Hartley spoke of his childhood memories in this very building. As they pored over documents together, their shoulders occasionally brushing, Lena felt something shift between them. The walls that had separated them, employer and employee, wealthy and working class, seemed to blur and soften. In their place grew something new, understanding, respect, and perhaps something deeper that neither dared name. Lena noticed the change in Mr. Hartley's demeanor the moment she stepped into his office that morning. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched as he stared at his computer screen. Papers were scattered across his usually immaculate desk. "Sir?" she asked softly, setting down his morning coffee. "Is everything all right?" He looked up, his eyes haunted. "Sterling Industries," he said, his voice rough. "They've announced a project almost identical to ours. They're presenting to the board next week." Lena's heart sank. Sterling Industries was their biggest competitor, known for aggressive takeovers and ruthless business practices. She'd heard whispers about them in the halls, seen their name in the financial papers Mr. Hartley read. "How did they—" she started. "No?" "Mr." Hartley stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. This project was completely confidential. Only a handful of people knew the details." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of deep distress. "They're not just copying our idea, Lena. They're improving on it. Their presentation promises everything we planned, plus elements we hadn't even considered." Lena watched as he picked up a glossy business magazine from his desk, throwing it down again in frustration. Sterling Industries' CEO smiled from the cover, looking smugly confident. "The board meeting is in 3 days," he continued, his voice growing distant. "If Sterling's presentation is better than ours, if they convince the board their version is superior—" He trailed off, but Lena could fill in the blanks. Everything they'd worked for would be lost. She stepped closer, wanting to offer comfort but unsure how. The intimacy they'd developed over the past weeks seemed to evaporate in the face of this crisis. "We can work on improving our presentation," she suggested. "There's still time to—" "Time?" He laughed bitterly. "Sterling has a team of 50 people working on this. We have 7. They have unlimited resources, international connections, years of experience in this exact market." He picked up another paper, crumpling it in his fist. "Everything my father built. Everything he trusted me to protect." Lena's chest tightened at the raw pain in his voice. "Mr. Hartley, please, let me help." But he was already retreating behind his professional mask, his expression becoming cold and distant. "That will be all, Lena. Please close the door on your way out." "But, sir—" "I said that will be all." She stood there for a moment longer, remembering how just yesterday they'd shared stories and laughed together over coffee. Now he wouldn't even look at her. The wall between them had returned, stronger than ever. Throughout the day, Lena tried to find ways to help. She organized the project files, prepared detailed summaries, and even stayed late to research Sterling Industries' past presentations. But Mr. Hartley remained in his office, door closed, refusing all interruptions. When she finally left that evening, she paused outside his door. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette, still hunched over his desk. The sight made her heart ache. She understood his fear, not just of losing the company, but of failing his father's legacy. She wanted to tell him he wasn't alone, that she believed in him, that together they could find a solution. But the words died in her throat. The connection they'd built felt fragile now, threatened by the weight of his fears and responsibilities. As she walked to the elevator, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, she felt more helpless than she had since that first day when she'd spilled his coffee. The man who had finally started to open up to her, who had shared his vulnerabilities and listened to her stories, was disappearing behind a wall of fear and pride. And Lena didn't know how to reach him. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Mr. Hartley's mansion, but it did nothing to warm the growing chill between them. Lena watched as Mr. Hartley buried himself in work, his office door remaining closed more often than not. When she did see him, their interactions had become purely professional, cold and distant, like strangers. "Your coffee, sir," Lena said, placing the cup on his desk. She'd made it exactly how he liked it, hoping the familiar comfort might soften his mood. He barely glanced up from his laptop, Thank you, that will be all. Lena lingered for a moment, remembering how just days ago they'd shared morning conversations over coffee. Now, the silence between them felt heavy and wrong. I've organized the project files and prepared some additional research on— I don't need help with that. He cut her off, his voice sharp. Please focus on your regular duties. The dismissal stung. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she straightened some papers on his desk, trying to maintain her composure. Of course, sir. Throughout the day, Lena watched him from a distance. Mr. Hartley moved through the house like a ghost, consumed by worry and stress. He skipped meals, ignored phone calls from anyone not directly involved with the project, and worked late into the night. During a rare moment when his office door was open, Lena overheard him speaking harshly to someone on the phone. I don't care what it takes. We need those numbers revised by tomorrow. His voice carried the edge of desperation she'd never heard before. The entire company's future depends on this. Later that afternoon, Lena brought him some documents that needed his signature. She found him standing by the window, staring out at nothing, his shoulders tense with worry. For a moment, she saw past the wealthy CEO to the man beneath, someone carrying the weight of his family's legacy, terrified of letting everyone down. Mr. Hartley, she said softly. He turned, and Lena's heart clenched at the darkness in his eyes. The warmth that had begun to show in recent weeks was gone, replaced by a cold determination that left no room for anything else, or anyone else. Just leave them on the desk, he said, turning back to the window. Sir, I know you're worried about Sterling Industries, but this isn't about Sterling Industries anymore, he interrupted, his voice tight. This is about everything my father built, everything he trusted me to protect. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that once would have prompted Lena to offer comfort. Now she stayed rooted in place, feeling the distance between them grow with each word. I can't afford distractions right now. Any distractions. The meaning was clear. She was a distraction, their growing closeness, the quiet moments they'd shared, the trust they'd built. All of it was a liability in his eyes now. Lena felt something crack inside her chest. She'd known their relationship was complicated by their positions, but she'd started to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to bridge that gap. Now, watching him retreat behind his walls of privilege and power, she realized how naive that hope had been. I understand, she said quietly, placing the documents on his desk. Her fingers brushed against a newspaper, its headline screaming about Sterling Industries' upcoming presentation. The reality of their situation hit her full force. If they failed, it wouldn't just be the company at stake. Everything they'd built between them, every moment of connection and understanding, would crumble under the weight of that failure. As she turned to leave, Lena caught her reflection in the window glass. Behind her, Mr. Hartley's silhouette remained rigid and distant, already lost in his thoughts again. The space between them felt infinite now, filled with unspoken words and unrealized possibilities. She closed the door quietly behind her, feeling the finality of that simple action. In the empty hallway, surrounded by the luxury of his world, Lena had never felt more alone. Lena stood in the kitchen, methodically preparing Mr. Hartley's favorite meal, a simple pasta dish she'd seen him enjoy on rare occasions. Her hands moved with purpose as she chopped fresh herbs, the familiar motions helping to quiet her racing thoughts. The mansion felt colder these days, despite the warmth of early summer seeping through the windows. Mr. Hartley's absence, even when he was physically present, had created a void that seemed to grow with each passing day. She arranged the pasta on a silver tray, along with a glass of wine and fresh bread. It was well past dinner time, but she'd noticed he hadn't eaten all day. Taking a deep breath, she made her way to his office. Mr. Hartley? She knocked softly before entering. He sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and multiple laptops displaying financial charts. I told you I don't want to be disturbed, he said without looking up. You haven't eaten since breakfast. Lena set the tray down firmly on his desk, moving aside some papers to make space. And coffee isn't a meal replacement. He finally looked up, irritation flashing across his face. I don't have time for— You won't have time for anything if you collapse from exhaustion, Lena interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Sir, she added, softening her tone. Mr. Hartley stared at her, then at the carefully prepared meal. Something in his expression shifted, a crack in his armor. You made the pesto pasta? He observed quietly. Yes. Lena began clearing some space on his desk. And you're going to eat it while it's hot. To her surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he watched as she organized the chaos of papers into neat stacks, creating order in the midst of his stress-induced disarray. Why are you doing this? He asked suddenly. Lena paused in her tidying. Because someone needs to remind you that you're human, not just a CEO. Being human is what makes me weak, he said bitterly. If I were stronger— Being human is what makes you capable of fighting through this, Lena countered. She placed the fork in his hand. Eat. Please. As he took his first bite, Lena moved around the office, straightening papers and organizing files. The silence between them felt different now, less hostile, more contemplative. The board meeting is tomorrow, he said after a while, his voice heavy. If we can't convince them that our project is viable, then you'll find another way, Lena said firmly. She turned to face him. Failure isn't the end, Mr. Hartley. It's just a detour. He laughed humorlessly. Easy to say when you're not responsible for hundreds of employees' livelihoods. No, Lena acknowledged, but I am responsible for believing in someone who's forgotten how to believe in himself. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, the walls he'd built began to crumble. I can't fail them, he whispered. I can't fail him. Lena knew he meant his father. She moved closer to his desk, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. Your father trusted you with his legacy because he knew you were capable, she said softly. Not because you were perfect. Mr. Hartley pushed away from his desk, standing to pace near the window. Every time I think I have it under control, something else goes wrong. The rival company, the board's doubts, the market volatility. And yet you're still standing, Lena pointed out. Still fighting. He turned to look at her. Really look at her. For the first time in days. How do you do that? Do what? Make everything seem manageable. Lena smiled gently. Because I see you, Alexander. Not just the CEO, not just your father's son. I see someone who cares deeply, works tirelessly, and deserves to be reminded that he's not alone in this fight. The use of his first name hung between them, an intimacy neither had dared before. Mr. Hartley's shoulders slowly relaxed, the tension he'd been carrying starting to ease. I've been pushing everyone away, he admitted quietly. Yes, Lena agreed. But I'm still here. He moved closer to her, his expression softening. Why? Because sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let someone else be strong for us, she said simply. The truth of her words seemed to settle over him like a warm blanket, melting away some of the fear that had been driving him. He looked at the organized desk, the half-eaten meal, the woman who refused to let him drown in his own doubts. Thank you, he said softly, and Lena knew he meant for more than just the dinner. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard, double-checking the numbers one last time. The office was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional rustle of papers as Mr. Hartley paced behind her. These projections, she said, pointing to the screen. They're actually better than we initially calculated. Mr. Hartley leaned over her shoulder, his presence warm and solid. Show me. She pulled up the spreadsheet she'd been working on for the past 3 days. See here? The cost-cutting measures we implemented last month have already shown a 15% improvement. And the new project strategy has increased potential investor interest by 30%, he finished, his voice gaining enthusiasm. Lena, this is game-changing, she completed, turning to face him with a smile. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the silver in his hair, and for a moment Lena saw the weight of weeks of worry lift from his shoulders. Print everything, he instructed, straightening up. We need to prepare for the board presentation. As the printer hummed to life, Lena organized the documents into clear sections. They had spent countless hours refining this presentation, and now it felt like all their hard work was finally paying off. The marketing team just sent their report, Mr. Hartley announced, checking his phone. Early feedback from focus groups is overwhelmingly positive. Lena couldn't help but smile at the excitement in his voice, so different from the defeated man she'd seen just weeks ago. Should I add their findings to the presentation? Yes, incorporate them into Section 3. He paused, then added softly, You know, none of this would have happened without you. Lena felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. I just helped organize the data. You're the one who… No, he interrupted, moving closer. You did more than that. You believed in this project when everyone else was ready to give up. You believed in me. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Someone had to, she said quietly. Mr. Hartley's expression softened. Do you remember that day you refused to let me skip dinner? Which time? She asked, attempting to lighten the moment. He chuckled, the sound warming the space between them. The first time, when you told me being human wasn't a weakness. I remember. That was the moment things started to change, he admitted. Not just the project, but… He gestured vaguely between them. Lena's heart quickened. They had been dancing around this undefined something for weeks, both too focused on saving the company to acknowledge it. Mr. Hartley. Alexander, he corrected gently. After everything we've been through, I think you've earned the right to use my first name. Alexander, she tested the name, feeling the shift it represented. I was just doing my job. No, he said, taking another step closer. You went far beyond that. You saw past every wall I put up. You stayed when anyone else would have left. The printer finished its task, but neither of them moved to collect the papers. The morning sun painted the office in soft gold, creating a bubble of intimacy around them. I stayed because I saw someone worth staying for, Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander reached out, his fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but electric. Lena, A knock at the door made them both start. Mr. Hartley, the board members are arriving early for the meeting. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, regaining his composure. But when he looked at Lena again, something had fundamentally changed. The professional distance that had always existed between them had dissolved, replaced by something warmer, more personal. Thank you, he said softly, and Lena knew he meant for everything. The late nights, the unwavering support, the quiet strength she had offered when he needed it most. The morning after their breakthrough, everything changed. Lena noticed it the moment she entered Mr. Hartley's office with his usual coffee. Where yesterday there had been warmth, today there was a wall. Just leave it on the desk, he said without looking up from his computer. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. Lena placed the coffee down carefully, noting the untouched breakfast she'd brought earlier. The board was impressed with yesterday's presentation, she ventured. They were, he replied curtly, still not meeting her eyes. That'll be all. But Lena didn't move. She watched as he shuffled papers unnecessarily, his movements jerky and agitated. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his suit, usually impeccable, showed signs of having been slept in. Have you slept at all? She asked softly. His hand stilled. I don't need a nursemaid, Lena. The use of her name, which yesterday had felt intimate, now sounded like a dismissal. She felt the distance between them growing with each passing second. The numbers are solid, she reminded him. The investors are responding positively. Why are you— Because it's not enough, he snapped, finally looking at her. The fear in his eyes startled her. One good presentation doesn't guarantee success. One moment of hope doesn't mean we're safe. Lena took a step closer, ignoring his attempt to create distance. Everyone expects everything. He stood abruptly, pacing behind his desk. The board, the investors, the employees, they all want guarantees. One mistake, one misstep, and it all falls apart. Alexander, she said quietly, using his first name deliberately. He flinched. Don't. We need to maintain professional boundaries. The words hit her like a physical blow. Professional boundaries? After everything we've what? He turned to face her, his expression hard. You're my employee, Lena. That's all this is. She felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. We both know that's not true. It has to be. He turned to look out the window, his back rigid. I can't afford distractions right now. The company needs you whole, she interrupted. Not this shell you're trying to be. His shoulders tensed further. I think you should focus on your regular duties today. Martha can help me with the project documentation. Lena stood there, feeling as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Just yesterday, he'd touched her face with such tenderness. Now he couldn't even look at her. Throughout the day, she watched him withdraw further. In meetings, he was cold and distant. During lunch, which they usually shared in his office, he was conspicuously absent. By evening, the emotional walls he'd built seemed insurmountable. But as she sat at her desk, staring at the financial reports they'd celebrated over just yesterday, something inside her hardened with resolve. She thought of all the nights they'd worked side by side, of the quiet conversations and shared victories. She remembered the way he'd looked at her yesterday, like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. He was pushing her away because he was scared, not of failure, but of hoping, of letting someone in only to lose them, just as he'd lost his first love. Lena stood up, smoothing down her skirt. The office was nearly empty, but light still shone from under his door. She knew he'd be in there, drowning himself in work to avoid feeling anything. She wouldn't let him. Walking to his door, she didn't bother knocking. She'd watched him struggle alone for too long, had let him push her away too many times. If he wanted to fire her for this, so be it. But she wouldn't let him destroy himself, or what was growing between them, out of fear. Her hand rested on the doorknob as she took a deep breath. She wasn't just his employee, and they both knew it. It was time to make him face that truth. Lena pushed open the heavy oak door to Mr. Hartley's office without hesitation. The room was dimly lit, save for his desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He sat there, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the man she'd fallen for. Strong yet vulnerable, powerful yet alone. He glanced up, surprise flickering across his features before the mask of indifference settled back in place. It's late, Lena. You should go home. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. She closed the door behind her and stepped forward. "I'm not leaving." His jaw tightened. "This isn't a request. It's an order." "Then fire me." She moved closer to his desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Fire me again if that's what you need to do, but I'm not walking away." Mr. Hartley stood slowly, his hands pressing flat against his desk. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I?" Lena's voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. "Or are you the one making things difficult by pushing away everyone who cares about you?" "This isn't appropriate." "What isn't appropriate is watching you destroy yourself." She took another step forward. "What isn't appropriate is pretending that these past months meant nothing, that we meant nothing." His expression tightened. "The project—" "This isn't about the project." Lena's voice rose slightly. "This is about you being terrified of letting anyone close, of letting yourself feel anything." "Mr." Hartley walked around his desk, his movements stiff. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand everything." Lena stood her ground as he approached. "I understand that you're carrying your father's legacy. I understand that you're afraid of failing. But most of all, I understand that you're terrified of loving again because you lost her." He flinched at the reference to his first love. "Don't." "I have to." Lena's voice softened. "Because I love you, Alexander, and I'm not going anywhere." The words hung in the air between them. Mr. Hartley's face paled, and he took a step backward, as if her words had physically struck him. "You can't," he whispered. "I already do." Lena moved closer, closing the distance he tried to create. "I love how dedicated you are to this company. I love how you pretend to be cold, but leave anonymous donations to children's charities. I love how you remember how everyone takes their coffee, even though you act like you don't notice these things." "Stop." His voice was rough. "I love how you helped Janet in accounting when her mother was sick, how you gave her paid leave without her asking." Lena continued, her voice growing stronger. "I love how you challenge me to be better, how you value my opinion even when you disagree. I said stop." He turned away, his shoulders rigid. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." She reached out, her hand hovering near his shoulder but not quite touching. "I'm not asking you to forget her. I'm not asking you to stop grieving. I'm just asking you to stop punishing yourself for surviving." "Mr." Hartley's hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I can't do this again. I can't lose someone else." "You're losing people anyway," Lena said gently. "You're losing them by never letting them in." He turned to face her, and the raw pain in his eyes made her heart ache. "It hurts too much, Lena. Loving someone. It hurts too much." "Then let me help you carry that hurt." She finally touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Let me show you that love can heal as well as hurt." Mr. Hartley shook his head, pulling away from her touch. His voice was heavy with resignation and fear. "I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't allow myself to love again. The pain, it would destroy me this time. I barely survived losing her. I won't survive losing anyone else." Lena stood there, her heart breaking at the pain etched across Mr. Hartley's face. The office felt smaller somehow, the space between them charged with unspoken emotions. The city lights twinkled beyond the window, casting shifting shadows across his features. "You're right," she said softly, taking a deep breath. "Losing someone you love is devastating. I watched my mother grieve for years after my father passed. She was broken, lost in her pain." Mr. Hartley's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn away. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of recognition. "But do you know what saved her?" Lena continued, taking a careful step forward. "It wasn't forgetting my father. It wasn't trying to replace him. It was remembering that love doesn't end with loss, that loving someone new doesn't diminish what came before." She moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. "Every morning, I watch you walk into this building carrying the weight of your past like armor. You think it protects you, but it's suffocating you instead." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Mr. Hartley's reflection in the window showed him struggling with her words. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice rough. "When Sarah died—" "I know about Sarah," Lena turned to face him. "I know she was brilliant and kind. I know she made you laugh. I know losing her nearly destroyed you." His eyes widened slightly at her knowledge of his past love. "But I also know something else," she continued. "I know that Sarah would never have wanted this for you. She wouldn't want you to spend your life afraid of feeling anything." Mr. Hartley's composure cracked slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "It's not that simple," he argued, but his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "No, it's not," Lena agreed. "Nothing worth having ever is. But I'm not asking you to forget her or to stop loving her. I'm asking you to consider that your heart might be big enough for both that love and something new." She moved to his desk, picking up the framed photo he kept there, a younger version of himself with his father outside the company building. "You didn't stop loving your father when Sarah came into your life. Love doesn't work that way. It grows. It expands." "Mister." Hartley watched her handle the photograph, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy." She set the photo down carefully. "It's terrifying. But being terrified doesn't mean we're wrong. It just means we're brave enough to try something that matters." She could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between his fear and his longing for connection. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he reached for the photograph she'd just set down. "I see you," she said quietly. "Not just the CEO or the man carrying his father's legacy. I see you, Alexander. And I'm not afraid of your past or your pain. I'm only afraid of watching you choose loneliness because you think it's safer." Something shifted in his expression then, a subtle change that made her heart skip. The rigid line of his shoulders softened slightly, and when he looked at her, really looked at her, she saw a glimmer of hope breaking through his carefully constructed walls. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Neither do I," Lena smiled gently. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together." Mr. Hartley set the photograph down and took a hesitant step toward her. The distance between them felt different now, charged with possibility rather than resistance. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a warmth she'd never seen before. "You're not going to give up, are you?" he asked, a hint of wonder in his voice. "No," she answered simply, "because I believe in you. In us. And I think, somewhere beneath all that fear, you do too." The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, and for the first time since she'd known him, the smile reached his eyes. It wasn't acceptance, not quite yet, but it was the beginning of something. A crack in the walls he'd built around his heart, letting in the first rays of hope. Dawn crept over the city skyline as Lena straightened Mr. Hartley's tie, her fingers steady despite the tension crackling in the air. The boardroom, usually so imposing with its mahogany table and leather chairs, felt different this morning, like a battlefield awaiting its warriors. "The presentation is ready," she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his jacket lapel. And the financial projections are bulletproof. We've gone over them a dozen times. Mr. Hartley nodded, his jaw set with determination. The past week had been a blur of preparation, late nights poring over documents and strategy sessions. The rival company, Sterling Industries, had made their move, presenting an aggressive takeover bid that threatened everything. "What if they're right?" he asked quietly, staring out at the city below. "What if I'm not the right person to lead this company?" Lena moved to stand beside him, their reflections side by side in the window glass. "Look at me," she said firmly. When he turned, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the weight of his father's legacy heavy on his shoulders. "You've spent years building this company, making it stronger. Your father chose you for a reason." She walked to her desk, retrieving the folder they'd prepared together. "Remember what we found in the market analysis? Sterling's proposal might look good on paper, but their track record shows they strip companies bare. They don't care about the people, the history. The legacy," he finished, taking the folder from her hands. "Exactly." Lena checked her watch. "The board members will be here in 30 minutes. Would you like to review the key points one more time?" Mr. Hartley shook his head, a newfound resolve settling over his features. "No. You've helped me prepare more than enough. I know this company better than anyone. I know its heart." They worked in comfortable silence, arranging the boardroom. Lena set out water glasses, arranged presentation materials, and double-checked the projector setup. She could feel Mr. Hartley watching her, his presence both comforting and electrifying. "Lena," he said suddenly, causing her to look up from adjusting a chair. "Thank you for believing in me, for staying." The sincerity in his voice made her heart skip. "Always," she replied simply. The first board members began arriving, their faces grave with the weight of the decision ahead. Sterling Industries representatives followed, led by their CEO, Marcus Sterling himself, all sharp suits and predatory smiles. As everyone took their seats, Lena moved to stand near the door, but Mr. Hartley's voice stopped her. "Stay," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. "You're as much a part of this as anyone." The room fell silent as Mr. Hartley stood, commanding attention without effort. Lena watched him transform, seeing not just the man she'd grown to love, but the leader she knew he could be. His voice, strong and clear, filled the room as he began presenting their counter-proposal. "Sterling Industries sees numbers on a page," he said, meeting each person's gaze. "They see assets to be divided, properties to be sold. But this company is more than that. It's the thousands of employees who've built their lives here. It's the innovations we've pioneered. It's the trust we've earned." Lena handed him each document as needed, their movements synchronized from countless hours of preparation. When Marcus Sterling tried to interrupt with pointed questions about profit margins, Mr. Hartley responded with unwavering confidence, using the very data they'd spent weeks analyzing. The meeting stretched on, numbers and projections flying back and forth across the table. But something had shifted in the room. The board members, initially skeptical, began nodding along with Mr. Hartley's points. Even Sterling's smile had faded, replaced by a look of growing concern. Lena felt pride swelling in her chest as she watched Mr. Hartley handle each challenge with grace and authority. This was the man she knew he could be. Strong, not despite his vulnerabilities, but because of them. The man who understood that leading with heart didn't make him weak. It made him extraordinary. The boardroom erupted in a flurry of activity as the final signatures were placed on the documents. Marcus Sterling's face had turned an interesting shade of red as he gathered his things, his attempted hostile takeover thwarted by Mr. Hartley's masterful presentation and irrefutable evidence. Board members crowded around Mr. Hartley, offering congratulations and firm handshakes. Through the crowd, Lena caught glimpses of his face, the relief evident in the slight softening around his eyes, the way his shoulders had finally released their tension. As the room gradually emptied, leaving behind scattered papers and half-empty water glasses, Mr. Hartley remained standing at the head of the table, his hands pressed flat against its surface. Lena busied herself collecting the presentations and organizing the signed documents, giving him a moment to process everything. "We did it," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, louder, "Lena, we actually did it." She looked up from her task, finding him staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You did it, Mr. Hartley. You showed them exactly why your father trusted you with this company." "Alexander," he corrected, taking a step toward her. "After everything we've been through, I think you've earned the right to use my first name." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the boardroom floor. In the golden light, Lena could see the emotion playing across his face, relief, joy, and something deeper, something that made her heart race. "I was wrong," he continued, moving closer. "These past few weeks, when I pulled away, I thought I was protecting myself, the company. I thought I needed to be cold, calculating, like Sterling." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of vulnerability. "But you showed me a different way." Lena set down the stack of papers she'd been organizing, giving him her full attention. "You didn't need to change who you are. Your father built this company on relationships and trust. You just needed to remember that." "You never gave up on me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even when I pushed you away, even when I was at my worst, you stayed. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." The space between them had shrunk to mere feet, the air charged with unspoken words. Outside the boardroom, they could hear the distant sounds of celebration as news of their victory spread through the building. "I couldn't leave," Lena admitted softly. "Not just because of the job or the project. I stayed because I saw who you really are, someone who cares deeply, who carries the weight of responsibility with grace, who wants to do right by everyone who depends on this company." Alexander reached out, taking her hand in his. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "Thank you," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "For everything. For your patience, your wisdom, your unwavering support. I don't deserve any of it." "You deserve all of it," she countered, squeezing his hand. "And more." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up to her face. The afternoon light caught the moisture in his eyes, making them shine. "I've been so afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of failing, of letting people down, afraid of feeling anything after losing Sarah. But you—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "You made me remember what it's like to trust someone completely." Lena felt tears prickling at her own eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd accomplished together. Not just saving the company, but breaking down the walls he'd built around his heart. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and unspoken promises. Through the boardroom windows, the city sprawled out before them, bathed in golden light, a view they'd shared countless times before, but somehow different now. The setting sun painted Mr. Hartley's office in warm amber hues as he led Lena inside, closing the door behind them. The space felt different now, less imposing, more intimate. The massive desk where they'd spent countless hours working on the project was littered with papers, a testament to their shared journey. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, moving to the small kitchenette tucked into the corner of his office. It was where Lena had spilled that fateful cup of coffee all those months ago, the incident that had started everything. "Yes, please," she replied, settling into one of the leather chairs. She watched as he prepared their drinks, noting how different he seemed, relaxed, almost peaceful. The constant tension that had lined his shoulders for so long had finally eased. "It's strange," he mused, bringing over 2 steaming cups. "This morning I was terrified of losing everything. Now—" He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing. "Now I feel like I've gained something far more valuable than just the company." Lena wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting its heat seep into her palms. "I never doubted you would succeed, you know. Not for a moment." "Even when I doubted myself?" He settled into the chair beside her, angling his body toward hers. "Even when I pushed you away?" "Especially then," she said softly. "Because those moments showed me who you really are. Someone who cares so deeply that it scares you." Alexander, she was still getting used to thinking of him that way, set his cup down on the side table. "You saw through all my defenses from the very beginning, didn't you? Even when I was cold, distant." "I saw someone carrying too much weight alone," she admitted. "Someone who needed to be reminded that it's okay to let others in." He nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "After Sarah died, I convinced myself that the only way to protect myself was to keep everyone at arm's length. Focus on work, on the legacy my father left me. I thought I was being strong." "But strength isn't about standing alone," Lena said, setting her own cup aside. "It's about having the courage to let others stand with you." "You taught me that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day, with your quiet support, your unwavering faith in me, even when I didn't deserve it." The office was growing darker as the sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the floor. The city lights were beginning to twinkle outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a backdrop of stars. "Do you remember that night we worked late on the financial projections?" he asked suddenly. "You brought dinner up from the kitchen, insisted I needed to eat." Lena smiled at the memory. "You were so focused on the numbers, you hadn't realized it was past 9 o'clock. "That was the first time I really saw you," he admitted. "Not as my employee, but as someone who cared, who saw me as more than just the CEO. He shifted in his chair, leaning closer. "I've spent so long holding on to the past, afraid to move forward, afraid to feel anything that might make me vulnerable again." "And now?" Lena asked softly, her heart beating faster at his proximity. "Now?" He reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, gentle, yet filled with certainty. "Now I realized that holding on to that fear was keeping me from something beautiful, something real." His thumb traced patterns on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "You didn't just help me save the company, Lena. You helped me remember what it feels like to trust, to hope." He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "To love." The city lights twinkled behind them, casting a soft glow over the office. In that moment, as Alexander held her hand, Lena could see the walls he'd built around his heart finally crumbling away completely, replaced by something new and precious, the promise of a future neither of them had expected to find. The evening city lights cast a warm glow through the office windows as Lena and Alexander sat close together, their hands still intertwined. The tension that had defined their relationship for so long had transformed into something softer, sweeter. "I never imagined this would happen when I spilled that coffee," Lena said with a small laugh, her thumb brushing against his palm. Alexander smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Who would have thought that my worst morning would lead to my best evening?" He reached up with his free hand, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle gesture made her heart flutter. "We should probably talk about this." Lena gestured between them, though she made no move to pull her hand away from his. "About us." "You're right," he agreed, shifting to face her more fully. The setting sun painted his features in warm gold, softening the sharp lines of his face. "I want to do this right, Lena. You mean too much to me to rush into anything." She nodded, relief flooding through her. "I feel the same way. We've both been through so much these past few months." "The company is stable now," Alexander said, his voice thoughtful. "But more importantly, I feel stable for the first time in years. You did that, Lena. You showed me that it's okay to open up, to trust again." Rising from their chairs, they moved to the window, watching as the city came alive with evening lights. Alexander stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. The touch was tentative, but filled with promise. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said softly. "A proper dinner, not just late-night takeout while we work on projects." Lena turned to face him, a smile playing at her lips. "I'd like that very much." "Tomorrow night?" His eyes held a mixture of hope and vulnerability that made her heart ache with tenderness. "Tomorrow night," she agreed. He drew her closer, one hand cupping her cheek. "We'll take things slow," he promised. "Get to know each other outside of work, outside of crisis mode." "I already know the most important things about you," Lena said softly. "I know your strength, your dedication, your capacity for love, even when you tried to hide it." Alexander's expression softened further. "And I know your compassion, your resilience, your ability to see the best in people, even when they can't see it themselves." They stood there for a moment, the city spreading out below them like a sea of stars. The office that had been the site of so much tension, so many late nights and difficult decisions, now felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new. "What about work?" Lena asked, practical even in this moment of joy. "Should we tell people?" "We'll figure it out," Alexander assured her. "The company has policies in place for this sort of thing. And after everything we've accomplished together, I doubt anyone would question your capabilities or position." She nodded, relieved. "So we're really doing this?" "We are," he confirmed, his voice warm with certainty. "But we'll do it right. Dating, getting to know each other outside of these walls, building something real, something lasting." "I'd like that," Lena said, her heart full. "Very much." The city continued to sparkle below them, a witness to their new beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but for once that uncertainty didn't feel frightening. It felt like possibility, like promise, like hope. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "Shall we go get some dinner? Start our new normal?" "Yes," Lena agreed, gathering her things. As they prepared to leave the office together, she couldn't help but marvel at how different everything felt. The same office, the same city lights, but now filled with new meaning, new potential. They would take it slow, build their relationship carefully, mindfully, but they would build it together, just as they had rebuilt his company, just as they had helped each other heal. The future stretched out before them, bright with possibility. 6 months passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. The hallways of Hartley Industries now held different memories, stolen glances, shared smiles, and the quiet understanding that came from 2 people who had weathered storms together. Lena sat at her desk, which had long since moved from the outer office into a corner of Alexander's spacious workspace. The arrangement had raised eyebrows at first, but their professional dedication quickly silenced any whispers. She looked up from her computer to find Alexander watching her, his expression soft. "What?" she asked, feeling her cheeks warm under his gaze. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "The company's latest quarterly report shows we're up 30% from last year." Lena smiled, remembering the long nights they'd spent poring over spreadsheets and strategy documents. "We make a good team." The The best, he agreed, standing to stretch. How about dinner tonight? That little Italian place we found last month? I'd love that, Lena said, checking her calendar. I just need to finish these reports first. The workday proceeded with its usual efficiency, but there was an ease to it now that had been missing before. Their relationship had grown naturally, each day building on the foundation of trust and understanding they'd established during those crucial early months. That evening, they walked hand in hand through the city streets. The spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from nearby window boxes. Alexander led them to the restaurant, where the owner, Marco, greeted them warmly. "Ah, my favorite couple," Marco exclaimed, ushering them to their usual corner table. "The same wine as last time?" "Please," Alexander nodded, pulling out Lena's chair for her. As they settled in, Lena noticed Alexander seemed slightly distracted, his fingers drumming lightly on the tablecloth. She reached across and covered his hand with hers. "Everything okay?" He smiled, turning his hand to interlace their fingers. "Perfect, actually. I've been thinking about how far we've come. Remember when you spilled that coffee?" Lena laughed. "How could I forget? I was terrified you'd fire me." "Instead, you changed my life," he said softly. "You showed me what it means to trust again, to open my heart. These past months with you have been extraordinary." The waiter appeared with their wine, and Alexander waited until they were alone again before continuing. "The company is thriving, but more importantly, I'm happier than I've been in years. And it's all because of you, Lena." She felt her heart begin to race as Alexander stood, moving to her side of the table. The restaurant seemed to fade away as he lowered himself to one knee, reaching into his pocket. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "About how you've transformed both my business and my heart. About how you've shown me that love isn't something to fear, but something to cherish." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "But what it comes down to is this. I love you, Lena. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she looked at the man before her. No longer the cold, distant figure she'd first known, but someone who had learned to love again, someone who had chosen to share his life with her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course I will." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, and as he rose to kiss her, the restaurant erupted in applause. Marco appeared with champagne, his face beaming with joy for the couple he'd come to know so well. As they celebrated, Lena couldn't help but marvel at how life had brought them to this moment. From a spilled coffee to a shared future, their story had unfolded in ways she never could have imagined. The ring sparkled on her finger, a symbol not just of their love, but of the journey they'd taken together, from employer and employee to partners in every sense of the word.